Hi, I'm Jeff Krebs from eyeon Software, and I thank you for joining in on this webinar. Today's webinar is going to feature motion graphics, visual effects, and template creation. eyeon Software develops a variety of visual effects products, and today we will be focusing on Fusion. eyeon is very proud to be celebrating 25 years of Fusion. Invented by Steve Roberts, eyeon's president and CEO, Fusion was originally developed in 1987 as in-house software, developed for use by New York Production and Design, a post-production and visual effects boutique based out of Sydney, Australia. The very first version of the software was written in DOS and consisted of a command line for quickly chaining together the output of pre-existing batch files and utilities. eyeon Software was formed specifically to bring Fusion to the adoring public. eyeon is now based out of Toronto, Canada, Sydney, Australia, and Germany. Fusion's toolset is incredibly rich and complete. Included on this webinar today is Eric Westphal and Blaise Floch. Eric is the product manager for Fusion and Generation, and Blaise is eyeon's product specialist and scripting guru. Over the next while, we'll be presenting a basic understanding of Fusion's use in design and motion graphics, as well as visual effects. At the end of the webinar, you'll be able to download an evaluation of Fusion and a variety of templates. I'll show you how to get Fusion at the end of the webinar. Before beginning your journey into visual effects or motion graphics within Fusion, it's very important to understand how a node environment works and how nodes add a level of efficiency simply not available in a layered environment. Nodes are for compositing. Nodes are sources, tools, and outputs connected on a logical mind map style flowchart. Tools, or combined groups of tools, can be easily duplicated, instanced, or branched in any direction. The most important concept to understand is that everything can remain on the flow. Even groups which may appear as a subflow are done for the efficiency of real estate on the flow. Note that grouping is not required as a matter of software functionality, which is what nesting is all about. Fusion simply does not require nesting. Think of it as a mind map of exactly what's happening. This makes it easy to follow along and even easier to figure out what a fellow artist or what you did weeks, months, or years ago. Another thing to note is that node positions on a graph have nothing to do with the overall visual result. The flow dictates the order of the processing, which can use the node's position to freely organize and structure your composition. The Fusion timeline is designed for exactly that, timing purposes for clips or effects, as well as slipping or rolling, and for precise keyframe control, as well for viewing efficiency. Since Fusion's timeline is for timing, moving items around vertically in the timeline has no effect on the composite and are movable strictly for efficiency purposes. So you can do this, or filter like this, without penalty. You also get a rich spline view for controlling your animation curve and comparison purposes. This can involve repetitive animation tasks. If layers act as the curtains hiding the details that are nested within, a Fusion node environment turns those layers inside out and lets you easily and logically work behind that curtain. Let's begin with something typical with a bit of style. As we look through this lower third graphic, understand that node-based visual effects allow you to very easily understand the process in which the effects are created. Whether it be a motion graphic like this or a composite visual effect, the philosophy is the same. Let's begin by playing the lower third motion graphic. Take notice of the elements in the graphics, a swooshy background, and the text. Now let's reverse engineer the graphic to see exactly how it was constructed. We begin with a rectangle background with a slight gradation in the color and transparency and some simple masks. The first masks are simply used for the animation to expose the background on and off the screen. It's simply an animated alpha channel as seen in the second viewport. Notice that nothing is hidden. You can see the masks attached to the main background tool. After that, we chained in a color corrector. Consider this the main color of the template, and a lovely tangerine color has been chosen. After that, we add a glow, again with some masks to highlight the glow in specific areas. Interactive as always, just choose the amount of glow and hit play. Simply add a bit more color correct, and now it's time to take this flat background into a true 3D workspace. 3D is just a matter of fact in Fusion. Understand that it's always available and can be utilized at any time. I can seamlessly move from 2D to 3D at any point in the composition. I'm using a 3D shape to pipe in my animated 2D image. After we arrive in 3D, we could now use a bender tool, which, as the name depicts, does exactly that to three-dimensional geometry. You have a choice of bend, taper, twist, or shear with a variety of parameters to go along with it, including, and just ignore that. So, by chaining together a couple of benders, we can create a very cool 3D swoosh, and the original mask is animating it on and off. Add some lighting and a required camera, and now we've easily created part 1. Please remember that this title will be available as a template for you to use in your own projects. Now let's move over to the actual title. On the other side of the flow, you'll notice two text 3D nodes, one labeled title and the other one labeled subtitle. By double-clicking on those nodes, you can not only change the content, but as well the style of the text. In our case, the decision was not to create the look of the text in the text 3D mode, but rather create it outside with a background and a mask. The background is for the look, and the mask is to animate the 3D text on and off, similar to the way we did it in the swoosh. There's a tool called the UV map, which effectively replaces the texture coordinates on the geometry. Now, by replacing the material on the text with the background and the mask, it's going to be really easy to create this 3D text look. Using external sources for the text makes it much easier to truly make this effect an open template. Simply change your source to your liking. Finally, let's put it all together. We have to move everything back into 2 dimensions for a final output. The way this is done is through a renderer. As a matter of fact, you can use as many renderers as you wish and set different parameters in each. The reason for 2 renderers in this effect is specifically so they can be combined and that the shadow blend becomes more controllable to your liking. With a final color curves, which is also adjustable, we now have our final lower third. Here is the same lower third 3D effect as a template or macro. This exposes only the parameters that you may want to adjust. We'll discuss a little bit more about macros soon. Let's have some more addictive fun with Fusion. Take a look at this bumper opening, and yes, the breaking news is that as incredible as Fusion is for big visual effects like this, it's also great for motion graphics design work. It's all a matter of understanding how this effect is assembled, and there's nothing better than Fusion nodes for that process. Here is what we see: 2 globes, a solid inner, and a wireframe-ish outer, an animated motion graphics background, and of course, the text of the breaking news. Let's break it down. We begin with this open source map of the world, but we're going to have to treat it in a number of ways for two reasons. One, we have to apply a look, and two, we have to move it into 3D space. To do this, we're going to force a matte using a couple of brightness contrast tools. The first gets rid of the chroma, and the second clamps the levels to black and white. To actually force an alpha, we're going to use a channel Boolean tool and apply any color channel to the alpha. Now, for the real look. This is created through Fusion's vast shader controls, in this case, blend. We can make the shader as simple as a color change or combine and concatenate shaders together to create stunning looks like these. So now, with our shader created, I'll move the image from 2D to 3D by simply applying the shader to a shape, in this case, a sphere. For the inner sphere, the exact same principles are applied with some variations. We wanted to get rid of the grid lines and apply a little bit of embossment to the image. This time, we prepped the image using some different methods such as eroding to get rid of the grids. Prior to the blend shader, we also applied a bump map for a slight embossment. There's no limitation to building incredible shaders for Geo. By combining the camera and some lights, we have the basics of this effect. When you check the camera, you can see the entire motion is based on a simple rotation and transform of the globes and a very slight camera move. Very simple, yet very effective. Just like last time, we moved from 3D back to 2D, but we'll simply pipe in a renderer. Now let's follow the flow to the end while we add more design elements. Behind the globe is a motion graphics background. This is a macro. Keep in mind as you look through the user-created tool at the unique labeling of the controls. Again, we'll discuss this in the next section. Beyond this, you'll find a series of color corrections combined with masks to define the look of this effect. Take notice when the title bar comes on, the mask is actually branched into multiple tools. As well, masks can be combined and applied in infinite ways. Again, this is just Fusion's standard brilliant functionality. Similar to the method of entering text in the previous lower third, the same approach is applied in this effect background, with the look being supplied by a shader so you can change it at a moment's notice. Finally, notice the green line between the camera and the instanced camera, rather than a duplicate. The reason the instanced camera exists is that we're shooting the 3D text in a separate pass from the globes. This is so that all the on-screen elements have independent controls, but the cameras will have the same results no matter which one is modified. Whatever you do to one camera, it's applied to the other. As described earlier, when we create the VFX background with the globe, the use of a macro is important when working with a VFX or motion graphics team. The concept is to take the effect that can be quite complex and simplify the really meaty parts so that it's easy to use for the general public. Making the macro accessible in the bin or a toolbar adds another level of efficiency. Additionally, macros can contain user-defined naming conventions for sliders so that they're really easy to understand in VFX workgroups. Let's take a closer look at the creation of a macro. If we look at the motion graphic background we created earlier with the globe, there's a good chance that we may want to work with the rotation of the globe only. Here's how it works. By simply selecting and collecting all the sources and tools you want to use, you can select the Create Macro dialog box. The dialog now has every functionality in the tool as a pick list of menu items. You can pick and choose what you require in your new tool based on any combination. Some users have referred to macros as super tools. In this case, let's simply select the Y rotation of each sphere. I'll name it Sphere Rotation. And save it. Now, when I select the macro, it automatically appears as a single node with all the tools embedded. With a couple of additional tools exposed and some unique slider names, this macroed version of the globe effect is instantly self-explanatory and very easy to operate and animate. Here's the macro created for the background of the globe motion graphic. Notice the unique tabs and controls with real-world naming conventions as created by the artist. Oftentimes, as great as your design is for something like lower thirds, bumpers, and billboards, there is still the inefficiency of populating all the content that's required. More often than not, editors and designers working on lifestyle or reality programming are responsible for this task. VFX has had scripting for years, which is automation or extended functionality with programming. For years, and even to this date, there has been a horrible inefficiency in the editorial pipelines. There is not an editor out there who has not used their favorite text editor or email to copy and paste names and other subtext. It's slow, inefficient, and error-prone. If any industry was in desperate need for scripting and automation, it's television post-production. The wonderful thing about scripting is that you can make Fusion do pretty well anything you wish. Boisget wrote this script, which is now available to the community. Once copied into the scripting folder, it will be available in Fusion. Scripting, which is supported through either Lua or Python, not only allows for the functionality within Fusion, but it also has the ability to create an interface, which opens up an entire library of possibilities. In this example, you can trigger a script that will look to a CSV file, a text file with a delimiter of your choice that can be easily exported from any spreadsheet application or database. The unique data is then merged into an existing effect style based specifically on a column name. This is how they have to match up to make it work for any template, as the text is placed in specific text tools within your composition. The script automatically triggers the render queue manager, and at this point we can start the process. This solves the problem that typically plagues editors of incorrect spelling and time-consuming manual entry. It's certainly better to spend most of your time on the creative process and style and let the software take care of the repetitive tasks. For those people running Avid products, we will have a script available soon that works with eyeon connection that will render the lower third results directly to your timeline. You'll even be able to automatically render data from Google Drive spreadsheets. Along with all this automation is the requirement to share the work that's either in progress or completed. Sharing can take place with the simplicity of copying and pasting. You can easily select all, copy and paste all the details of your effect in an ASCII text format. Artists have been doing this for years in email, Skype chat, and even on major forums like Pigsfly or the Fusion mailing list. It's a great tool, as you could find and replace tools, source paths, whatever's in the text file, and apply the changes. Additionally, one of the most under-discussed features in Fusion is the bin. The bin is a great local storage tool, but it's even better shared on a network. The bins are a common workspace that all artists can use for tool settings, tools, macros, fuses, images, and footage, even PDFs and Maya scenes, and any other common assets that are related to the production of the effect or shot. Take notice that I have two instances of the bin. One is local, and the other is a library of lens flare templates that will be available to you, and they reside on a network. The benefit of a shared bin is that it becomes a central storage location to host all the elements that are available in the production, as mentioned earlier. A shared bin takes very little computer horsepower, so even an older computer can be used for this task. Our next discussion will involve particles. Particles are creative elements that are instrumental in both visual effects and motion graphics design, and can be combined into pretty well any effect. Fusion's particle system works both in 2D and 3 dimensions, depending on how you set it up. In 3D, you can embed it within Fusion's 3D system. This is another area where the value of Fusion nodes is very important for understanding the construction of particles. An important concept to understand is that particles will always require an emitter, a start point, and a renderer, an end point. Think of a particle flow as a complete thought, and if you look in the bin or tools menu, there are tools which are forces, and other tools give additional control over the particle stream. Follow along and try this once you've downloaded your evaluation of Fusion. Click on the particle emitter and a particle render in your toolbar. This will lay the particle emitter and renderer down onto the flow. Now let's create a simple particle that emulates kind of a fire-chasing smoky ring type of thing. It's important to turn off the fast viewer if it's enabled in your viewport. Select the Control tab and open up the velocity control and set the velocity very low to 0.05 and the velocity variance to 0.1. These determine the initial speed of the velocity of the new particles. Most important, let's give an angle variance the amount of 360 degrees. This will give us rotational motion. Next, skip over to the Style tab and set the style as blob. Open up the size parameter and set the size to 0.3 and the size variance to 0.2. Work specifically with the color over life wheel and not the top color wheel to your liking, but I wanted a pale yellow to an orange color with an immediate cutoff to black. The transparency also matters, so I gave the pale yellow an alpha of 0.3 and the orange 0.2, and the black I made fully opaque with a value of 1. Finally, switch over to the Region tab and set the X offset to -1. Next, click on the Z rotation and select the expression and type in time times 10. Remember to click back on the flow so you don't add anything else to the expression box. Finally, adjust the X pivot to 1. Go ahead and click the play button on the interface. Now we have our flamey smoky ring thing. Finally, jump back to the Style tab and play with the fade in and out sliders to adjust the head so it appears to be chasing its tail. Experiment by playing with other controls to see the results. Of course, more particle templates are available for download and you can use them in your own productions. Here's another simple particle setup that can either be used for visual effects or motion graphics. This is a simple setup and designed as a template for you to use on your own images. We'll start with a particle emitter and renderer, just like before. This time, let's jump right into the Style tab and change the style from point to bitmap. This will enable an amber input triangle so you can place bitmap image sequences of your own choice into it. Most important, change the animation parameter in this tab from over time to particle birth time. Next, jump over to the Region tab and we'll change it from a sphere to a cube. This is so we could set up a nice stage for our particle system. So I'll just go ahead and choose a height, width, and depth of 5. Go ahead and find an image sequence. I'm going to use some photos from a trip to Africa. So if I hit the play button now, the particles will randomly be placed and cycle through the image sequence too quickly, so we need to add some more control. Jump over to the Control tab and adjust the particle number from the default of 10 to 1. 1 will equate to 1 particle per image. If you run out of images and want a busier scene, increase that number. Now set the lifespan to 500 so the particles last longer on the screen. I can use on-screen controls so that I affect the particle's velocity, position, or any other control I decide to add to it. By adding a camera, you'll certainly have complete control over your flight path through this particle cloud. Adding a soft clip to the end of the flow will allow for a better transition as the particles come closer to the camera and avoid a visual popping off artifact. This way I can fly through the particles with real predictability and modification capabilities, including light, depth of focus, and clipping. Try additional forces into the particle flows and play with the adjustments to see the results. I'm going to switch over to a more advanced example of the same effect with a bit more animation and a couple of extra tools. One thing to take notice of is that particles need a chance to birth. So if I switch over to the timeline, remember the timeline is for timing, the effect starts at -103. What the world sees always starts at 0, but we can work in -0 to give the particles a running start or a pre-roll. feel free to download this particle cloud template and modify it as you see fit. One of the more unique features of Fusion includes one of the newer tools called Replicate 3D. The Replicate 3D tool replicates input geometry at the position of destination vertices. This includes mesh vertices as well as particle positions. This tool is really great for everything from VFX to motion graphics. Before we dive into tool usage, for this webinar we'll show you some basic functionality of Replicate 3D. First thing, let's begin by using a simple piece of geometry, in our case, a sphere. We'll begin by copying and pasting the sphere, and let's change the second shape to a cube. Let's adjust the cube size just a little bit and place a little animation in the cube through the use of a really simple expression. If you right click on the X rotation and add the expression times time 2, and we'll do the same with the Y rotation, except we'll type time times 1.5. Great, we're all set. Let's add the Replicate 3D to the flow, and let's pipe in the sphere into the background and the cube into the foreground. Check out the result. The first step is to make certain that the alignment is set to aligned. Alignment specifies how to align the copies in respect of the destination mesh, normal, or particle rotation. Right away you get some interesting results, and you'll certainly trigger some ideas for imagery. Don't forget, combined with other tools, there's no end to Fusion's capability. How about, by doing this, add a noise generator and a displace, and we'll change the shape to wireframe or mesh before plugging the results into Replicate 3D. Interactive as always, oftentimes you'll be working as fast as you can think. Let's take a peek at some of the creations from various artists where Replicate 3D was used. This webinar is the first part of many that will feature visual effects, motion graphics, and template creation. All the templates you've seen today, plus many additional templates, are available for download. Feel free to modify them for use in your own productions. Thank you once again for spending a bit of time with us. A reminder, if you need help on the use of specific tools, you can find the Fusion manual at manual.eyeonline.com. To evaluate Fusion, fill out the form at eyeonline.com/eyeonevaluation-download. The link will be available in the About section once this webinar is posted to YouTube. With that, we would like to open up our text chat line where we will take your questions and comments.